Hello, everyone, and welcome to Black and Abroad, an interview series highlighting the lived experiences of Black expats around the world. I'm Kendall Tyson, your host, licensed therapist, and fellow Black expat. We have a great episode in store for you tonight, and with that, I would like to welcome our guest, Ty Dotson. Say hey, Ty.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. So just a little bit of background about Ty. She hails from the great state of California in the United States, but currently she is an expat in Portugal, born in California, grew up in the military. What branch of the military were your parents in?
My mom was Air Force, my dad was a Marine.
Oh, wow. My auntie was Air Force. I did Air Force ROTC for just a little bit. She is a worldwide traveler. She's lived places such as Spain, Germany, Korea, Bahrain, and Kuwait, as in addition to other places within the United States. So without further ado, I want to welcome Ty again to Black and Abroad. And I would say the first question that I always like to ask is, who's Ty Dotson?
It's an interesting question, or at least, well, I shouldn't say that because I'm biased, but no, I am just a 37-year-old DEI practitioner, mother of two, married to the kindest human being I've ever met, most supportive person. But really, I'm just a regular person out here trying to live my best life. And I think that's one of the things that I wanted to make sure to say, because especially with Black people in the US, sometimes we think that you have to be really rich or, really famous or something to get out and to live your best life. And you really don't. There are ways to make it happen that don't require you to have, millions of dollars or anything like that. So just out here trying to thrive.
Listen, thriving in Portugal. That sounds like a good series to begin.
Listen, yes.
So you said that you are engaged as a DEI consultant. Can you give us more background on that? Because that sounds quite interesting and very timely.
Yes. So I am the diversity and inclusion program manager for my organization. And actually later this year, I should be moving into a new role. So
congratulations.
That's exciting. Thank you. But that, what am I trying to say? It's very interesting because diversity, equity, and inclusion work obviously is really big right now. It's, buzzwords, everybody's talking about it, everybody wants to do it. But when you are in an organization, my organization is $2 billion plus, so it's a really sizable organization. Right. And driving that conversation and getting leaders to understand that DEI is not just all of the touchy-feely and I want to feel good when I come to work. It is that. But it's also, this affects the bottom line, and there are, business reasons for us to be having these conversations. So it's very interesting to sort of work both sides of it and be thinking about the employee population and how people are going to be able to show up as themselves to work every day and be accepted and valued, et cetera. But then also getting leaders to understand, how they can help facilitate that, but then also how they can take those messages out to clients or investors or whoever in a business sense.
Yeah. So how is it that you got into DEI work?
That's always, I think part of it was the way that I grew up, moving around, seeing so many different ways of life, seeing, just seeing the world the way that I did. And then as an adult, I was really only in the US. I spent about 15 years in the US after high school, and coming in at the entry level after I got my degree, trying to work my way up, trying to figure out making this little $12 an hour or whatever it is not cute. But struggling and seeing folks who didn't look like me, that at least in my view, whether I'm right or not, were not necessarily as talented or as skilled as I was. Moving up and getting promotions and doubling their salaries and all of these things. And then I'm looking around wondering what's going on. Why, if I'm working as hard, or I know my review was better than that person's, because we talked about it or whatever. But I'm still just I'm not getting ahead, so what's up with that? So then asking those questions. And so when I joined my current organization, I was, more entry level. I wasn't doing, anything. I was just doing client support. And so I started asking those questions. I said, you know what, I'm going to take this job, but I'm just going to ask questions. I'm going to do me. And so I actually ended up being able to go through, we had a diversity leadership program at that time. I went through the diversity leadership program, again, asked questions, was pushing and was saying, hey, what are we doing about this? What are we doing with that? And so my questions ended up getting to, people who make decisions. And they created this role at the end of 2019. I stepped into it. And then about 2 weeks later, everything shut down for COVID. And then of course, like 2 months later, everything went wild with, George Floyd and everything. So it just, but it was just the passion and the asking questions.
Yeah, being inquisitive, wanting to see change. So I'm curious, like I'm from Texas.
That's where I moved from.
Yeah.
I was in Austin.
What city? Okay.
I was outside of, I was in Round Rock, but yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So I graduated from UT in 2005. Okay. And being from Houston, Huntsville area, with everything that happened around, George Floyd and then the explosion of COVID, I'm curious to know, like in your role, what did it look like from your perspective as a practitioner, really trying to, I can only imagine what the answer is going to be, like really trying to help navigate how to have these conversations and create spaces that are safe. What did that look like from your perspective?
It was wild and exhausting. I will tell you, the week, what was it? So George Floyd, I believe, that happened like either at the end of a week or on a weekend. And then the following week, I had 3 different white coworkers cry on the phone at me about how horrible they felt. Okay. And I just, to your question, right? So I know it wasn't necessarily about, the white demographic specifically, but that's sort of how this started. That wasn't necessarily the very beginning, but that was sort of like the beginning of all of the wild part of it. Where I'm trying to figure out, to your point, how to create safe spaces, how to make sure that specifically folks in our community understand that, if you need to take care of your mental health, if you need to take a day, if you need to step back, whatever it is, be vocal, say that, go to your leaders and say, hey, listen, this is really heavy on me right now. I can't, I need to take some time for me. And trying to get that messaging out. And then sort of on the other side, I've got these folks crying at me and not wanting to alienate those folks, because I understand it's heavy on anybody, It doesn't matter, who you are, what you look like, especially if that's your first realization for whatever reason. And we could go into that, but just giving grace, if that was, your first realization of the inequities, that is heavy, right? So I'm trying to make space and save space for, these coworkers that are crying at me. And I'm like, I'm trying to deal with this myself, and you're crying at me and telling me you feel bad. And I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you. I just don't. Yeah. I'm ill-equipped, and I do this work every day, but I'm ill-equipped to tell you anything. So it was just interesting to try to navigate that. My organization, like we had some folks from one of the NAACP offices come in and just do a chat and try to help us spark the conversation, which was really great. And then we held some like live chat sessions for a couple of weeks after that, where people could come in smaller groups and we could have some conversation. But it was really just about trying to break down some of the barriers of, oh, we can't talk about this at work, or, oh, this is uncomfortable, and getting folks to understand that, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but you get to be uncomfortable. That's okay. So yeah, but it was wild, because that whole summer obviously happened, and then Chadwick Boseman passed, and that's when I broke. And not that the rest of it wasn't heavy, but I'm a nerd. I love Marvel. Black Panther was us, right? Yeah. So when that happened, I sort of spiraled, and I spiraled into depression, and I didn't realize it initially. And then it was something like 3 weeks later when Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed, and that wasn't a thing for me. No. Sorry. Right before that, the verdict for the Breonna Taylor case came out, and I cried. That's when I was like, I have to get out. I have to, because I went to college in Kentucky, and I lived in the West End of Louisville for a little while. Like, and I'm just thinking to myself, that literally could have been me. Like, I lived not far from where that happened. And I cried at my husband for like 3 hours. I was like, listen, I can't anymore. Yeah. So, and then our BG passed, and that's where I was just like, you know what? I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. So we were like, I have to get out. We have to get out.
Yeah, it was a barrage of tragedy, right?
It was just nonstop. It was.
So, let me ask you, I know we getting way ahead, which is fine with me. You said that you began to spiral into a depression. And one of the things, especially with Black women, we don't necessarily realize the symptoms of depression and anxiety. We tend to think, there was a quote that I was reading, it was like, we don't really see the symptoms or recognize, we think we're failing, right? Yes. We think that we're inadequate in things. So I'm wondering, how did you know that you weren't doing well? Like, what were some of the things that you noticed were shifting in your life and in the way that you related to the world and people in your circle?
It just, like, for the most part, like I said, I didn't notice at first. So it was probably maybe late October, early November before I said the words, I've been depressed. Like, and I that's when I realized it. And it's mostly has to do for me with work, because I try to be just on top of it. I try to be, make sure I'm thinking ahead, and strategizing and, spinning all the plates like we do. And I realized, since about early September, which again, right after Chadwick, I just haven't, like, I was like, I can't get myself together to do anything. I did sort of the bare minimum with at the time we only had one son. So I was like, I'm just doing the bare minimum, sleeping more. And that's an indicator where I'm just like, I'm exhausted all the time, missing things at work, not necessarily missing things, but not driving, because my role is really to drive, the DEI at the organization. And I wasn't really doing that. I was being very reactive about a lot of things, and still, like, to your point, feeling like I was failing.
Right.
But yeah, I think it was mostly just realizing that I wasn't accomplishing the things I needed to accomplish, but then also just being exhausted and not really caring about the fact that stuff wasn't getting done, because I just couldn't. Yeah. I didn't have the spoons.
Yeah, like that apathy, just really not showing up as yourself, and obviously to no fault of your own. I would say, when you begin to realize, okay, something isn't clicking, I'm not firing on all cylinders, I don't feel like myself, I'm not showing up the way that I normally would. What did your systems of support look like when you began to realize, I need some assistance?
So I wasn't in therapy through most of that year, but when I realized it, I called my therapist, I was like, hey, it's been a while. Can we, can we talk? That was one of the first things that I did. So I am huge on therapy. You don't have to be in constantly, but when you need help, you call your person and go.
Right.
And so luckily, she's phenomenal. She's a Black woman. She's married to a white man. So we had that in common. So she kind of understands some of the conversations that I'm having in my house. So she was the first thing. And then again, my husband, he, after I cried at him, I think he just realized that I just needed support. And that, that was kind of it, so whatever it is, if I needed to, go lay down or, whatever, he just sort of made sure that everything was taken care of, because I just couldn't handle it.
Yeah. That partnership is really important. And, even giving yourself permission to accept it.
That's been huge just in my marriage period, because I've always been, strong, independent Black woman, don't need no man. And I had been single for like 5 years even before I met him. So I know this is sort of going off on a tangent, but to your point, there's a lot of things that you have to figure out and work on in a marriage. But that was one thing that I didn't realize going in, how much work I was going to have to do to just let some things go.
Yeah.
And accept the help that I was being offered. Because I would just be like, you know what, it's fine, I'll do it myself. And then I was like, but if I'm going to do everything, why am I even
why be partnered? Exactly.
Right. So that's been
Exactly.
a whole journey.
I can only imagine. I really appreciate the candor and the honesty, because I can, you know, as a single woman living in the US, you have your resources really right at your door, but that changes once you decide to engage in the expat life and you are the guest in somebody else's country, right? So
yes,
just to, you know, segue back to, and we'll come back to that, just segue back to, you know, tell us about your journey when you finally decided to become an expat and move abroad.
Yeah. So of course, first things first, I had to go to my company and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is what I need to do. Is this possible? I was very lucky that they said yes, because a lot of organizations say no.
Right.
Ultimately, they said, hey, you need to flip to 1099. We can't support you if you're going to live in Portugal, but we can, keep you as a 1099 contractor and do it that way. So that was the first thing. And then from there, obviously, it was just starting the visa process, figuring that out. And I'll say it's obviously different for every country. But one thing that in my experience was very helpful was finding someone, because I know in most countries that have a large or, a population of expats, there's someone that offers a service to help you figure out the visa process and all of that. That's not a lawyer, right? That had, having those really, really high fees. So I found a relocation specialist to work with. That made sense for us because I had a family and there was a lot of moving parts to it. So I highly recommend finding someone to get help with if that's something that you can afford to do. But if you're able to go it alone, that's great too. So we worked with her to gather all of our documents, understand the process. Obviously, we joined every Facebook group, trying to figure out, just meet people, figure out, the lay of the land, because we had never been to Portugal. So we chose Portugal. For me, again, because of the reasons, we had a son and I was like, safety is number one. So I got on Google and I said, what's the safest country on the planet? At the time, it was Ireland and New Zealand, which are both, I knew, not easy places to get into. And then Portugal was third at the time. I think they're fourth now. And I was like, all right, third safest country on the planet. That's that, like, let's do that. But then also cost of living. We did want to be in Europe. For us, that was important. I was trying not to culture shock my husband too much. But then also his family is on the East Coast. So the time difference, if we needed to get back or something like that. So those were, I should say, we figured out what our priorities were and then figured out what country would support that. And Portugal for us was the one that hit all the boxes. Yeah. So yeah, the journey, we went through the process of gathering all of our visa documentation. The process here, you mail it all to this is called the VFS office, VFS. And then they mail it to the Portuguese embassy, and then you just have to wait for your answer. And then when you get approved, you mail them your passport, they put the stamp in there and mail it back, and then you can come to the country. Wow. So we did that. We mailed everything off, what was it, end of March, I believe, and we got approved about 3.5 weeks later, and we were here. We flew out. Yeah, it was really fast, and it doesn't always happen that fast, in Portugal. There are people who waited months, or even up to a year. I've heard stories. So that's also why I say I think it's important, if you can work with someone. In my opinion, it's a good idea to do that, because I think I believe one of the reasons why we got approved so quick is because she understood what they were looking for and put the package together in a way that would make sense to them. And so we got approved very quickly. Right. So yeah, we flew out in May. I was 30 weeks pregnant when we landed in Portugal. Oh, wow. So that was the other part of it was, we made the decision to move, and then I found out a couple of weeks later that I was pregnant, and we were like, okay, well, do we wait or do we go? But again, I needed to get out. So waiting was not an option. So We landed here, and yeah, about 2 months later, I had my son, and that's
Oh,
sort of the
wow.
journey.
Little Portuguese baby.
Yeah, yeah.
So tell
He's,
me,
he's
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, you're good. You're good.
I know, we know the maternal mortality statistics in the US especially for Black women, and how that's being championed right now. We're trying to get litigation to change the way things are, open the minds, give more training about racism, implicit bias, all these things, the things kind of like in your area, but on a system wide. So I'm curious, having your son in Portugal, what would, if you want to share,
Yeah,
what was that
absolutely.
experience like? Because obviously you had your other child in the US. How
Mhm.
would you compare the two systems?
Okay, and I think I get that question a lot, and I think one thing that we have to be cognizant of is apples to apples. Okay. And so for me, I was in a position with my first son that, I had really good health insurance. I, was with one of the premier, one of the better known doctors in the Austin area. I had access to a level of healthcare that a lot of us don't.
Right.
As far as Black women. So I want to be mindful to point that out. My birth experience with my first son, was great. I didn't have any issues. It wasn't traumatic for me. And actually that was when, I was pregnant when all those articles first started coming out and circulating real heavily. And everyone I knew was sending me articles about Black women dying. And they were like, and it's higher in Texas. And so I'm sitting in Austin like, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. But my first birth experience was good. I felt very well taken care of. My doctors, and actually I was doing what we were talking about earlier. I was trying to take on more. So they gave me the epidural and I was letting it kind of wear off. And I was like, well, I feel a little bit of pain, but it's okay. I'm good. And she was like, no, ma'am, you tell us when you start feeling pain so we can give you more.
Yeah.
So that was the first experience. So I'm very well taken care of. Here, it was a wholly overwhelming experience in a way that I wasn't prepared for, but not because it was a negative experience. It's because I moved to a country where I didn't speak the language and went and had a baby. So both of my kids were C-sections, and that's only relevant to the point because I'm laying on the table, and they had a nurse that spoke English. And so she kept saying, talk to me. And I started feeling very overwhelmed. And I'm sure she could see my stats rising or whatever it was. And I was getting dizzy and I just kept going, I don't know. I'm just really overwhelmed. And she talked me through it and she was very hands-on. And of course my husband was right there, but they were almost two different things. The fact that I was very overwhelmed had nothing to do with what they were doing. It was just the situation. But this woman was so, she was just right there. I never felt like I didn't have someone. And this was in an operating room, while they're, getting my son out. So I think both experiences for me were beautiful. I think my experience here in Portugal is, and I certainly could be wrong. So, if anybody's watching this and had a different experience, by all means, but I feel like my experience in Portugal was probably more standard. Maybe not, I'm not sure, but I know my experience in the US was not standard. I got good care because I had good insurance, and that is not something that enough people have.
Yeah. Man, that's a story, right? And I would imagine standard because everybody has equitable care, right?
Right.
And above standard because you are blessed to have this resource, at your disposal that one would hope and, that we're fighting for more people to have access to. So
absolutely.
Kudos for having a kiddo in another country.
Yeah, thank you. It was listen, like I said, I had to get out. And that was sort of the end of the story for me. I was like, all right, I'm pregnant, it's fine, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah. So tell me, how do you believe, well, let me ask you this. What was one of the defining moments once you all did make that decision to move and you're landed in Portugal? Other than having your baby.
Yeah, I was gonna say probably having my baby. Honestly, I don't even know. It has been such a whirlwind. Other than having my baby, because that was such a huge part of when we first landed. The biggest thing, honestly, has been the community. I have never been in a place with just so many beautiful, thriving Black women that are just, not here on some nonsense, not about the drama. That, like, listen, I'm trying to thrive. I don't need all that other BS. And that's, in the community. I'm not saying that the drama doesn't exist.
Right.
But in the community, it doesn't matter if they're, it's the retired, population or the younger population. There's just this love, this support. I don't live directly in Lisbon. I'm about 40 minutes away. But even still, if I needed help, I could call any of these women and they would get here. And they would support me. And that specifically from a group of Black women is something that has changed my life and me in a way that I don't know that I was prepared for. Like, I was just looking to get out of the country, but to get out of the country and to find just a bunch of women who look like me killing it.
Yeah.
It hits different. It just does.
Yeah. Focused and on a mission and probably seeking the very same thing that you were, some sort of peace. Maybe a bit of an escape from something, but I would definitely say a lot of times, I meet people that are expats, especially here, that are running from something. And while that might be true, it's also, what is it that I'm trying to move toward? Like, what's the mission?
Yep. And that's the beautiful, and I, like I said, I've lived all over the world. This is the first place that I've lived and had just a community of us to lean into. And so that's, so like, I'm, like I said, my job may end up having me move again. And I'm like, man, I don't really know that I want to move, because I don't know that I'm going to find this, again, but it is what it is.
I'm wondering, so you talk about how much of an impact the community has made. When you think about your mental health, because obviously we're going to venture into continue to venture into mental health. How do you believe that having the systems of support that you've been able to cultivate with your family, outside your family in Portugal has been of benefit to you mental health wise?
All of the things that, so some of it is just being in Portugal and not being in the US, right? That just the new location is part of it. But then above and beyond that, having the community it's multiple layers, right? So I'm able to just put things down that I just couldn't put down in the US, right? That heightened sense of awareness everywhere that I go, and, not being worried when I drop my kid off at school, what's going to happen? Am I going to get a phone call that there's a shooter? Like, all of those things that I just could not put down. I put them down, I don't worry about those things here. And so that frees up the ability for me to focus on other things, right? But then taking it that step further is having this community. We talk about representation, and I think we say the words, but I don't necessarily know that we always realize how important representation is, right? It's wonderful if you're that trailblazer and you're the only Black woman in a room full of white dudes or whatever. That's important, but it's also important because the people behind you can see somebody who looks like them doing it. So being able to see myself reflected in my community, I wish I had the words to truly explain it. I really don't. But that has been transformative in terms of mental health. And even on top of that, and this is not to do with being an expat, but being able to see like Lovecraft Country. There was an episode in that show where, that whole episode was, about that the Black woman and just
transformation when she kept
and being able to see yourself and this positive messaging, right? It's transformative. And it just makes you realize when they say that all things are possible, that also means you too, right? You can do those things, you can have those things.
Yes, I really appreciate you saying that, because sometimes we we hear the platitudes, right? You can be whatever you want to be, but some, depending on what we've gone through, and if we've experienced any type of work trauma, anything else, surrounding really trying to live our best life, it's very difficult to be accepting of the fact that that you can also have all of these good things that you see happening for everybody else. And I often wonder, what kind of mindset shift does it take to go from like living in the US or all over the world, and then you're in a place immersed in women that's working, Black women that's kind and caring and giving, and then, not feeling a sense of imposter syndrome or worry, depending on whatever your history is, right? I'm wondering, did you have to make any type of mindset shift, any kind of transition in thinking when coming into this space with so many of us?
I don't think so, but I could see where someone may need to, right? I mean, again, when we talk about the things that you're able to put down and the things that you no longer have to worry about, and then figure out, if you've never been able to step out of that stuff, I could imagine it being some work to make that transition and to figure out how to thrive if you've never been in a situation where you were able to just thrive and be you and be accepted. That wasn't my experience, but again, I traveled and did some other things, so I knew what I was going to some extent, just not, I didn't realize there was gonna be so many of us here.
That's what I've heard from every Black woman that I've spoken to that's in Portugal, which has been a few of y'all lately. Listen, Portugal's always been on my list. And then when Leah introduced or connected us, I was just like, oh my God, Portugal. Am I getting these, confirmations? And then just to hear that there's so many of us thriving there, it's kind of like, maybe that's the next leg of the journey. Are you open to being surrounded by excellence without the need to feel like you got to compete?
Yeah,
because we're so used to being competitive.
Yep. That's a beautiful thing. And it's a privilege too, right? Part of the reason why we get to set some of that stuff down is mostly because we're all here. Most all of us are working for organizations in the United States. We're not competing to get things here, right? Because that's the other thing that happens a lot in some of the Portugal expat groups, is people will talk about, oh, well, how are Black people treated in Portugal? Well, Portugal has race issues too, right? I mean, they were a major slave trade hub this is where that started, right? So, there are issues here too, but we also have to recognize our privilege in being Black American people in this country, because I personally have not experienced anything that I recognize as racism since I've been here. It may have happened. Maybe it looked different, and that's why I didn't recognize it. I know that it does happen here, but typically and I don't know if this has been your experience in China, but once folks realize that you're American, you get treated differently. If they think you're African,
it's different.
That may be different. So there is a privilege to it that I think, does help the mental health, but I think we also have to recognize that that's a privilege, and not everybody who looks like me in this country has that.
Yeah, I feel you on that. There's like a layer of protection that comes with that privilege, even being here, working at an international school, in the career that I'm in. I'm a bit inoculated from some of the experiences of other Black people of the diaspora that would never be able to experience, some of the perks and things that I can. So it's kind of understanding that while we are all Black to them, we still have very different experiences within our subgroups. And so what does that look like to be more collaborative and less competitive, more supportive and more open? I can say that that's been a bit of, it's a mixed bag here, right? It's a mixed bag, and it's very much identifying like-mindedness, but being open to the process of, kind of like filtering through different communities, I would imagine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I said, you figure it out. But I would say, you know, for me and my family, it's been good. And this, you know, my kids seem to be thriving. My older son doesn't seem to want to learn Portuguese, but
It's
you know,
hard.
he's 4, so yeah, like
Oh, he's so
he doesn't
good.
want to do
Yeah.
anything, so that's okay. But
He's at that
yeah, I
stage.
think yeah, that's just where he's at right now. But yeah, I think it's been good, even though there have been struggles and things that we had to. Because I mean, you know, we get here and there's a different way of life here, and you know, like our house doesn't have air conditioning, so when we moved in September and it was still hot, and we live right by the water, so the breeze is really nice. But at night, you know, then we're getting eaten up by mosquitoes because we have to leave the doors open so that we don't
Right.
overheat. So, you know, there are convenience things. Like I'm looking at your AC and behind you, and I'm like, man, I'm
And it's
jealous.
on heat right now because it's cold outside.
Listen, yeah. So, you know, it's learning and overcoming some of the differences. It took us a month to buy a car.
Oh, wow. Oh, y'all driving? Girl,
And
that's brave. I
from
would never drive other than the scooter in
yeah.
China.
Well, and because we're not in Lisbon, that's
Right.
why
Gotta
that's
transit.
why I was like, okay, we need to get a car, because with 2 young kids, it's we tried it from September. Well, really, we didn't have a car the whole time we've been here, but when we moved out here in September until now, it's been a struggle. It's been a struggle. We spent a lot more money on Ubers than I had thought we would.
Wait, they
So
have
that's why
Uber?
we got a car. Yeah.
We have a thing called Didi, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of different. There's Uber and Bolt are the two main ones here. There's a third one, but I've never used it. But yeah, so you know, we are figuring out how to make this work for us, right? Because we're not going to do everything the way that the Portuguese do. We're not Portuguese, but we're trying to, you know, assimilate some and figure out, okay, well, what are they, you know, how do they do things that make sense? So like we go out and get groceries, you know, several times a week. We don't buy like 3 weeks of groceries like we did in the States. So things like that just change the lifestyle a bit. I've been cooking more. My husband cooks most every night. Like those are things we just didn't do in the US. And so when we talk about mental health and thriving, like I made cookies from scratch. You don't know me that well, but I don't I don't make cookies from scratch. That's not that's not something I do. But I've done it twice now because I had time and I said, you know what? This was fun.
I really like that, how just being in a different space, you know, kind of being forced to slow down, you're engaging in life with things that maybe you would have never done before. And I wonder, do you feel like you've grown through this shifting process? That's kind of the word that keeps popping up in my mind when I have these conversations, is that everything is constantly shifting.
I do. I think this has forced, well, between this and COVID, because us all being locked in a house together, also for, I mean, it's either gonna go real well or not, is what I've seen. So between those two things, I mean, when you move, especially if you're moving with someone, if you're moving alone, there's still things that you learn and challenges and there's growth. But when you're doing it with other people, I mean, that's where you find out, you know, sort of what you're made of, because some days everybody's just pissed off but you still have to make this stuff happen. So I definitely think growth, since we've been here, I feel like I've been really able to focus on being a better parent. You know, I'm trying to do the gentle parenting and you know, setting reasonable boundaries, but not, you know, acting like we own them, you know, and they have to do what we say. Just, you know, that kind of thing. I just don't think that you're able to focus on that as well with the way that our society is put together in the US. You don't have time. And when you do have time, you're tired and you're stressed and there's all these other things. So it's just nice, again, because I've been able to put this other stuff down, because I'm able to focus on, you know, my family and all of that. It just feels better, and I feel like I'm able to move towards being a better parent. And ultimately, work, all the rest of that stuff is less important to me than being a parent. So
it sounds as if like priorities begin to shift once you have the space for it. Because I know, like back home, there's really, the priority is honestly in some regards survival.
Yeah.
And when you're in survival mode, thriving, what is that? No,
Yeah.
mental health. I don't have time.
Yeah.
So
What is self-care? I don't,
who has
yeah.
money for self-care when I'm trying to make ends meet, care for these people, care for myself, depending on culturally where you are, take care of my extended family. There's a
Yep.
lot. So that's part of the reason why I'm doing this, is just to shine a light on culturally how we can love the cultures that we're born into and still pick what works for us and set
Exactly.
boundaries around the things that don't.
Exactly. And I think the other thing, and I love that point, because one of the things that I hear from so many people who are like, I really wish that I could move, but my family would miss me, or whatever. And it's all of these emotional ties that I understand, they make sense, right? Nobody wants to be the person that everybody's like, well, you left us, and blah blah blah. But at the same time,
Guilt.
yeah, exactly, you only have one life. And
Yes.
I'm not saying that means that you just say, screw everybody, I'm going to go do whatever I want. But you have to figure out how you can do what's best for you in this life, because you only have the one.
Exactly.
So, making that decision, I think you just have to prioritize what's going to be best for you.
Right. But honestly, I believe that depends on trusting yourself, knowing that you have a voice that's separate from the family, kind of like reducing that enmeshment. But the thing is, and this is a lot of ethnic minority families, and this is a wide generalization, we're so heavily entrenched in our families. We're communal. We make communal decisions, and it's difficult to be able to kind of like step outside of that and see yourself as an individual with the permission to make your own decisions, regardless if somebody else has an opinion or not. Because to your point, I hear a lot of people, oh my God, I wish I could do what you're doing. And I'm just like, you can.
Well, yeah, most of the time you can't. I mean, there are realistic barriers, right? If you have a child with somebody and y'all aren't together and they won't let your kid leave,
that's a legal thing.
I understand that you don't want to leave your child. Like, I get that, right? Like that, you can't go. I hear you. But, outside of some of those very specific situations, is it that you can't go, or is it that you feel guilt about leaving? Right. And is understanding what the difference is.
Yeah. And not being afraid to take that risk. Do you consider yourself a risk taker?
I would say no, but I think objectively, yeah, probably. I don't look at things as risk though, because to me, if I can draw the logical, journey, like people would say, oh, it's amazing to me that you moved your whole family, to another country that you had never been to. That seems risky. To me, it doesn't seem risky. To me, what seems risky is staying in the States. So that's why it's so weird. People are like, are you a risk taker? No, I don't think so, but I guess I am.
A little bit of an intrepid spirit. I think you have to have a level of fierceness and self-awareness and self-trust.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
This.
Yes, definitely that self-awareness, because a lot of things, again, when you talk to people, even after they move, a lot of people will say, oh, I hate it here. This was the worst decision I ever made. And that always, my first question, goes to that self-awareness piece. Did you pick the right location for you, or did you just, what research did you do? What thought process did you do? Were you really honest with yourself about what you were looking for? Right. For me, this worked because it made sense for our life. If I had moved to China to teach at an international school, I would probably hate it because that's not for me. Right. But you have to be honest with yourself.
I agree with that. I think one of the things that I really appreciated when you kind of expounded upon y'all's process, right, of how you arrived to the decision, okay, Portugal is it, and this is why. There's an alignment in the things that we're seeking and the things that this place offers, as opposed to, again, somebody running from something and not really having the presence of mind to know this is really what I want to do in the next phase of my life. We call, like when we have, because I have these days, I don't have them as frequently anymore. We call them China days, where it's just like, screw everything, ain't nothing working. I can't understand. I don't want this food. These people drive me crazy. I'm tired of being stared at or touched or videoed without my permission. And it's like, okay, just go home, lay on the couch, read a book, because it's gonna pass.
Yeah, and that's you just have to be able to roll with it. Like I said, it took us a month to get our car. I had some days where I was like, I'm a failure. I can't even get us a car. This is horrible. I hate it. But it's not about all that. Just go home, drink some tea, have a glass of wine, whatever.
We got tea everywhere here, so
yeah, right.
I think like I said before, the overarching word that I constantly keep coming back to is shifting. It's a constant shift. It is not a static process. No. Like one day will be great, another will not. But it's kind of like resilience is the name of the game when it comes to choosing to live in another country.
It is, because even once you land, and I'm sure this dissipates after a while, but probably after you land, the first year, it's not, oh, okay, well, I'm here now, so it's all good, everything's good. No, there's still a lot of things that you have to do, and the more people you have with you, the more things come with that. So just understanding that you're not just going to land and then all of a sudden your whole life is fixed. Like there's an adjustment period, and that's okay, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it takes longer than you anticipated.
Yeah.
And then when the holidays hit, it's like, oh my goodness.
And then you miss your family, and and there's different that you can't find eggnog or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like but whatever it is,
or no turkey.
Yeah, and you get set off, and it's like, you know what? I'm just mad. But it's just different. You just have to embrace doing things a different way, and that it really is okay.
You have to. So let me shift into when we think about all of the stuff that we're talking about has a mental health lens to it. Because I would say for myself, I like things the way that I like them, but I've learned, especially living in China of all places, is if you are not accepting of your reality, if you buck against the brick wall that's not moving, you are constantly going to be frustrated. You're going to be depressed. You're going to be anxious, withdrawn. So I'm wondering, when you think of growing up and attitudes about mental health and things of that nature, what would you say were like the cultural influences, family-wise or community-wise, about mental health and regarding mental health?
That's such an interesting question. I almost don't even know, because I don't recall ever talking about mental health growing up. I don't remember. It's just not something that I really remember ever even thinking about at any point. I mean, I was like 30 before I was like, you know what, I might need to try to go to therapy. It just wasn't something that we ever talked about, or I never heard about it or anything. You just sort of dealt with whatever you were handed, and words like self-care and all that wasn't in our vernacular growing up. So I will say, I think when my mom had cancer, there was some therapy there, but specific to that incident, right? Like not just general mental health, it was specific to that thing that was happening. So it wasn't something ongoing. It wasn't something that really, that we really did.
Yeah, and that is literally the answer that every person that I have spoken to, myself included, has said. And my mom is a counselor. My mother's a retired counselor, school counselor. But growing up, we didn't have conversations about, are you anxious? Are you depressed? I see that you're withdrawn. Are you harming yourself? Have you thought about suicide? Any of that stuff. And I keep asking myself, what is it that back then, right, kept us from having these conversations? What was it that got in the way or made it not prevalent or not recognized? What would you say?
But I think that culturally, to the point that you made earlier, we've culturally only ever been in survival mode as Black people. We have not yet known a time of thriving as a people. That literally has not, in the US specifically, but I'm sure that's true worldwide. We have not known thriving culturally.
Yeah.
So when, you said it exactly earlier, when you're focused on survival, how you can't mental health from that perspective. That's you can't do that. You can't mental health your way out of not having enough money to live.
Or
so if all of your
stress,
right. So if you're, a parent and you have kids or a kid and you can't get them the things that they need because you don't have money, the things that you feel related to that there's nothing that's going to happen other than you getting more money or more support that's going to get you out of that. So it's just, I don't think it was possible. I think we're moving into a point now where more of us can thrive. But again, culturally, most of us are still in survival mode.
True.
So, I mean, a lot of it was, if you're in a bad mood or if you're feeling whatever, buck up, get over it, be resilient. I mean, especially as Black women, that's, this is life.
Myth. A strong Black woman myth, which is so pervasive in our communities, which takes me back to that statement that I made earlier, where we don't even recognize in ourselves the symptoms and signs of anxiety, the symptoms and signs of depression, because we're so used to having to be on all the time. I was having this conversation with a coworker of mine, and she's a young white lady. She was like, I'm exhausted just listening to what you're saying right now, all of the things that you feel you have to be to everyone to even show up and walk through the door. Which is why when I get phone calls the week after George Floyd happened of coworkers talking about this, that's why I said I don't know what to say to you. I get that this is stressful, and it's not to be diminishing. I mean, we're all in different places and we all deal with different things. But even doing what I do, I have conversations all the time, and to be quite candid, with white women who are just like, this is so exhausting. We've been having this conversation, or we've been talking about this for 2 years or 5 years or 3 years, or however long they've been involved in the conversation. I'm tired now. I just want, but my people have been doing this for 400 plus years. So like, I hear you, and I don't want to diminish what you're feeling. Right. But like, you're exhausted by my minimum everyday existence. Bare minimum. Right. Like things that are stressful for me as a Black woman in this society, you literally couldn't handle. And that's not even something that I'm proud of. Like, that sucks. Exactly. And that's the thing about it. But again, we're just now getting to the point where we can have that conversation openly and say, I hear that you're exhausted. Take a rest, right? Like you deserve rest, but also understand that the things that you're exhausted by don't even scratch the surface of what a lot of people have to live with day in and day out. Right. And you can walk away from, that exhaustion. You can treat that exhaustion, but the lives that we're living, we have to find ways in which to pivot so that we aren't fully overwhelmed by the things outside of us that try to get in the way of us being our best selves and living. So, even as a therapist, that's a difficult conversation to have. I have to get supervision about that a lot when it comes to like racial trauma and working in spaces that are really anti-Black and don't have systems set up to support a multicultural coalition of individuals in the building that speak a good game. It's nice on paper, but when it comes to living your values, when it comes to how you implement those things on a daily basis, there's such a disconnect, and that's challenging for me. That's very challenging for me. So I'm wondering, in the work that you're doing, which is noble work for sure. I've been in a corporate setting before, and it's quite cutthroat. What do you notice are ways in which you're able to rebuild your stamina, take care of yourself? Like, what are some of your go-to things? What would you suggest to people when it comes to making time to like take care of yourself throughout this process? Throughout the process of like becoming an expat, or just being an expat, living abroad, doing the work that you're doing, engaging in the spaces that you've chosen to be in? Yeah, I mean,
for me, it's carving out time to do things where I can just literally cut away from everything, right? So the way that my day is set up, because I work generally East Coast hours. Okay. So when I get up in the morning, I get up, I take my older son to daycare, and then I walk into the town center and give myself a sandwich and a coffee. And I sit there. Sometimes, I'll see a friend and we'll chat, but we'll just, something that you might do in the States after work, maybe, like go to happy hour or something. I do early in my day, have coffee, see friends, whatever. And then honestly, I come back and take a nap. There are a lot of days where I just come back, because again, this is exhausting and there have been stressful days here. So like sometimes I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna go take a nap. Like I can't deal with things. So like we put the baby down for a nap and we take a nap. But just being able to do that allows you to decompress in a way that, like in the States, again, I might go to happy hour, I might go shopping on the weekends or something, but I'm not really putting anything down. I'm just sort of shoving, products on top of it. Yeah, exactly. So, but here I'm actually able to just disconnect and just not do things. And I think that's why I'm able to focus more on a lot of these other things, is because my whole day is not packed with worrying about things.
Yeah. Oh, just I can only imagine like the level of lightness and alleviated stress and worry, just to not to have to worry, not to be able to engage in spaces that are calming.
I'm still stressed out about a lot of stuff, like like my husband
that's part of life,
so that we can move over here, right? So like, so I'm a single income, my money and all that. So like, I'm still stressed out about stuff. But to your point, it's and what we've been talking about, it's just a lot less stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't walk away from one thing into another thing to be stressed about. Generally, I'm you know what? I can't do anything about that right now. I'm gonna go take a nap.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Like it's just less stuff.
I wish that I knew younger how like the power of napping was. I would have done it a whole lot more.
But also the power of being an expat. Like, like the reality of this is, I wish I had, and I knew, again, because I grew up moving around and being overseas, and I knew that I always wanted to come back to it. What I didn't know was how to really make that happen. And I passed on the opportunity to go work for the government in Germany as a younger adult. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, well, I guess I'm just never going to get back overseas. But the reality is, to the point we made earlier, you can make it happen.
Yeah.
And I wish that I had realized that at a younger age, because I could have been, this could be my 10-year, mark of being out of the country. And what would my life be like then? I don't know.
Right. And that's the thing that I was going to say is, I think things come to you when they're meant for you.
Yes. I agree.
Right. Because like you've grown up overseas. I've always wanted to go abroad. But when I think about like where I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I'll just go with mental health wise. I was not in the position to be able to do the things that it took to leave the country. Although I've always been like, oh, I'm going. But I don't believe I would have been able to thrive the way that I am now, because I have a heightened sense of self-awareness. I'm further in my career. I have joy, freedom, I'm not feeling so tied to like necessarily my job, and it's not necessarily entrenched so heavily into my identity. There's a level of liberation with maturity.
I agree with that entirely. I do. So as much as we all say, oh, if I had this, X number of years ago, the reality is it came when it came. And
exactly,
I'm thankful for it. And I think that's at the end of the day, all it is I'm thankful for the fact that we were in a place where we could make this happen.
Yeah.
And not everybody has that. And I just think it's really important to acknowledge that. But there are ways to get there. And I think that's the biggest messaging is, if you're not there now, okay, but create a plan, because there's a pathway to the expat life.
It really is. I keep coming back to like freedom. Yeah. It's given such a sense of freedom, and again, a sense of trust of self, and just
empowerment.
Yeah.
Right? Like empower, like I really did move my whole family to another
Drop
continent.
everything.
Right. Just, and I mean, so, when you talk about I can do anything, like I moved to another country and had a baby. I can do anything.
Yeah, literally.
Right. Like whatever it is, I know we can handle it, but just that liberation.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's nothing like it.
Yeah. It's kind of like you manifest the thing, because I have my vision board on my wall just in front of me, and the personification of I can and I will. That's kind of the way that I see it. Right.
Yep.
So I just have a few more questions, kind of going back to the mental health space, being a Black woman, a mother, a wife, an expat, an executive. What would you say? What would you hope when it comes to the advancement of mental health in our communities? What would you like that to look like? That's a loaded question.
Listen, everything. No, first of all, I would really, and I think that we have come a long way. So I want to start by saying that I do think that we have come a long way, but I would really love to continue to see support for folks taking care of their mental health in our community. I think that there is still a lot of stigma, particularly with older generations, where, now for the younger folk that are going to therapy and unpacking all of the things. Right. And I know I've had conversations with my parents where, they feel like I'm blaming them for, X, Y, and Z. So I'm not blaming you. I'm just unpacking things as I, experienced them.
Exactly.
It may involve you, it may not, but I'm not, it's not a blame situation. It's me trying to figure out my life. So I really wish we could get rid of some of that stigma. And I wish that, and it's not just older folks, but I wish that more people would understand that just because I'm going to therapy, and maybe my therapy involves me having a conversation about my relationship with you, that doesn't mean that I'm blaming you or that I think you're a horrible person or anything like that. Sometimes it does, but usually it's not about you. It's just about me unpacking what I experienced and how it made me feel. So I think that's one of the biggest things, outside of just more of us going to therapy and doing the work and unpacking it, because that has such a huge effect on, for those of us who choose to be parents, how we parent our kids, right?
Yeah.
Are we still spanking our kids? Because that's what happened to me, and I turned out fine.
It worked.
No. But you know what I'm saying? So I just think that reverberates, and we are culturally dragging so much stuff forward with us that finally being able to put that down, again, culturally, and have that reverberate forward to future generations, that's beautiful. Yes. Right? Like that should be the goal.
Yes. Oh, I love that. Sometimes, in the work that I do, some people are used to, like, their identity is tied up in the trauma that they've experienced.
Yes.
And it feels unsafe to let go of the things that you've had to hold on to for survival to get you here. Yeah. Right. And so it's kind of like, what could it look like when it comes to collectively as a community creating spaces where we're giving people permission and support to, again, unpack and just be untethered, to those things, untethered from those things that have just held you down so much, drug you to this point, not allowed you to really live the life that you wanted to live, but not been able to live because of extenuating circumstances, right?
Yes.
And I really feel like being an expat has given a lot to our communities. We say this all the time, it's hard to see. It's hard to be it if you can't see it.
Exactly.
So when it comes to, like, spreading this message of expat living and thriving, what is something that you would say to any expat, anybody that's desiring to be an expat that's watching this?
I would say, as you are doing your soul searching, as you are figuring out, hopefully going to therapy, and as you are figuring out sort of where you are and where you want to be, one of the most important questions that I think we should all be asking ourselves all the time, it should be a consistent examination, is, are those things serving me? So you made the comment about, the things that that got us here, and it's hard to let that go. I think the question to me is it still serving you? Because just because it got you here, it may have saved your life to protect yourself by holding on to, that trauma or whatever it is. That may have literally been life-saving for you. That's valid. But is it still serving you? Because if it's not, if you don't still need that, let that go. Right? Because that's probably hindering you from getting to that next place that you want to be, whether that's being an expat, whatever it is. That's, I think, one of the most important questions. And it speaks to having that level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Right? You may not, 10 years ago, you may not have been able to leave the country and be an expat because of X, Y, and Z. Valid. But are those things still serving you? And can you put those down and leave?
That's a word.
It really, I think we overcomplicate things, and sometimes things are complicated, but I think a lot of times we're just overcomplicating them for ourselves. And again, life is too short.
I agree. I say this to my mom all the time. I wonder why things seem like they always have to be so hard. And sometimes she's like, sometimes you do complicate them yourself, because everything in life is not that challenging. But then when I think about feeling like I've always had to fight to get the thing that I want, and then is it really worth it if I'm not fighting for it? Is it really worth it if I don't have to go through something in order to get it? Like disabusing ourselves of the notion that it has to be hard for it to matter, because it doesn't.
Well, and I don't, and I'm going to take this real left, right? But I have conversations sometimes with friends where we talk about, those relationships where people are like sugar daddies or sugar babies or whatever. And people, we look down on things like that. But it's like, is it really all that bad if somebody's like, hey, I think you're cute, I want to pay for you to live a good life? Right. So I'm taking it real sideways. But listen, for all, and we don't even have to get into it, but really at the root of it, to me, listen, get it how you live. If somebody wants to take care of you, you don't need to feel guilt over that.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're getting something out of that relationship too. And again, it's not about all the details of it. Right. But to the point that you were just making, everything doesn't have, sometimes people can just want to do nice things for you.
Yeah.
And that's okay. And you don't have to have guilt about it. It doesn't cheapen it. It doesn't make it any less.
Right.
But again, being able to sort of accept that help and say, you know what, for right now, this is serving me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting people need to be sugar babies. that was an example that came to mind.
And if you are, be safe, get your life.
Yes. Absolutely.
Make good decisions.
Yes.
I just wonder sometimes, like with our history as Black people of the diaspora living in all different places, sometimes I wonder, is the struggle so intertwined in our existence? Like,
probably. I mean, how do you, no, I didn't live through the civil rights movement. I wasn't alive for that. But how do you untangle the fact that the results that of that whole situation are still, I do DEI work, right? We're still having affirmative action conversations 60-something years later.
And the Supreme Court is about to bust that all up again.
Right. So, is it intertwined? Yes, it's intertwined. And all of it is, all the way back from slavery, that is all still intertwined, because police the way that they do because they started out as slave catchers. Like you can't untangle that without doing the equitable work to restructure the system.
Right.
Because as long as that system stands, it's all intertwined, and there's nothing that you can do to fix that.
I agree. That brings me to this question. When it comes to how do you believe that you are benefiting your community, uplifting your community, making a difference? What would you say?
One of my biggest things is just encouraging Black folks specifically to look at where you are and see if you want to get out. Right. Yeah. So I have a lot of those conversations where I'm just trying to be encouraging and trying to show, I post pictures of my family on my page. I don't do it publicly, but I post pictures of my family so people can see, we're not balling out of control or doing anything completely wild, but so that they can see what they can be if that's what they're interested in.
Exactly.
But then again, yes, I did move my family out of the country because that was what was best for us. Yeah. But I'm still doing my DEI work, you know, and it is my small way. I'm not changing, you know, the whole world at once, but that's my small way of saying, okay, but I'm not abandoning my community. I am still working every single day to try to make sure that, you know, we're examining the structures that we have in place, at least within my organization. What barriers can we knock down, things like that? Because yes, I felt like I needed to get out of the country for my safety, but there are still people back there and we still need to change that system. So those are the two things that I am making sure to do, because I could have easily left the country and been like, I'm going to be a freelance, you know, IT, whatever, you know, whatever, and just been like deuces. But right. That's not what I wanted to do. I just couldn't stay.
Yeah, I even think conversations like this, just giving people, like, giving them a light into something that's different, is work in itself. Again, you're able to see it, therefore, hopefully that pushes you closer toward that goal of becoming it. I am so grateful for the opportunity to talk to you. We're not done quite yet. We're almost finished.
That's fine.
We have a lightning round of questions, and then I'll give you the opportunity to share any last thoughts that you'd like to share. But I love these questions. So we'll go with the first one. What's one word that you would use to describe yourself? Everybody's always
yeah, because we don't talk about ourselves. One word to describe myself. There's probably a better word, but I'm going to just go with caring.
Okay. I like that word. What's your, well, I won't even say to visit. What's the most favorite country that you've lived in?
I lived my best life when we were in Kuwait. And that's a whole other story. I don't even know if we have time to get into that, but Kuwait was probably, I was like junior, senior in high school. Everybody in that country has money. Not everybody, but the Kuwaiti people, because of the way that they're set up, they, you know, they do well. But then everybody that's like an expat, or they're all like ambassadors, embassy folks, or they're highly paid oil people or whatever. So like there's this wealth in the expat community in Kuwait, or at least there was when I was there in the late 90s, early 2000s, where even though we weren't wealthy, everybody that I was hanging out with was like, it's just this very bizarre situation where like I got to live the life of the rich and famous, even though I wasn't. So it was a very interesting time. I don't know what it's like now, but that was probably my favorite. But I also love Germany. I just loved living in Germany. So
do you think that you'll make living abroad like more of a permanent thing? Do you ever see yourself going back to the US?
It may happen, but my husband and I talk about it constantly. We have zero desire to go back. We may not stay in Portugal forever, but we have no desire. My husband actually wants to move to Japan, and he's 6'4". So I'm really, really trying to figure out how we're going to live in Japan and be comfortable when he's 6'4". But
listen, I was so surprised when I moved to China, and there are literally tall people everywhere. You really get to see a country when you're in it, as opposed to how the media portrays a country, which is probably part of the reason why when like we come into these spaces, or I'll just say specifically me here in China, you get the stares and, you know, the pictures and the video, because I can only imagine what you see as the media portrayal for people like me, and I'm not African. It's always this, they're always like, and I'm like, I'm real. It's interesting. It's interesting. Okay, so Sprite or ginger ale?
If I'm sick, ginger ale, but otherwise Sprite.
Canada Dry, man.
I mean, but if you're sick, Canada Dry, Schweppes, like that's what you do.
For sure. You have a favorite musical group?
I have been really I have a very eclectic taste, but
Okay.
over the last really 2-3 years, I've been really into Black female artists. Janelle Monáe has been, and I wasn't really super into her music before, but that's been a part of my just self-care, my thriving, listening to music by us, for us, kind of a thing. So Janelle Monáe, I would say, I don't know if she's my absolute favorite, but she's been high on the list lately.
What about old Lauryn Hill?
I like old Lauryn Hill, but yeah, for whatever reason, I have a harder time with like Black music from the 90s. I do some R&B, but I do better with some of the new. I like some of the, because Janelle Monáe does like weird stuff with her music, and I appreciate that
for sure.
She's very eclectic. So that's a lot of what I appreciate about her. I mean, I love Lauryn Hill. I have some of those songs I play on repeat off of the Miseducation, but I don't. She's not super high on my list.
I hear you. So when I know we've talked about this a little bit before, but is there something particular that you might miss about being home back in the US? Or what would you call home?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer for that. I usually just tell people Kuwait because that's where I graduated high school. I really don't have a place that's home. But I really Splenda. I really don't miss anything. Like literally someone in one of the groups that I'm in was like, I'm coming to Portugal. I'm bringing an extra suitcase. Let me know if you need anything. I asked her for the biggest box of Splenda she could find and some lotion, some Aveeno, like the lavender Aveeno, because they don't have the lavender here that I've seen for the kids. She brought me a 1,200 packet Costco box of Splenda and some Aveeno baby. I really don't, other than Splenda, that's the only thing I'm constantly asking people to bring me, because I don't use sugar and I don't like stevia. So, but otherwise, like if I go back to the States to visit, I'm gonna get some Chipotle and probably some Taco Bell. But like I don't really miss it.
Yeah.
If I never have it again, oh well. Right. But Splenda, you can mail me Splenda.
I keep thinking about that, like the longer I'm away, my sentiments change. Like obviously I love my family, I miss my friends, but when I go back home, it's always this itch to leave. I'm good for 2 weeks, and then it's like, all right, I need a flight.
Yeah. I haven't had the desire to go back at all, and COVID is part of that too. But like I do want to go back and do some networking stuff with folks that I've met. I'm on the board of Austin Women in Tech, so like I want to go back and like meet people. So from a career perspective, I do want to go back for certain reasons, but COVID's made that difficult. But other than that, I have no desire. I don't.
Yeah, I hear you. Do you have?
Because I can't even think of where I would go.
Or come to Houston.
I listen, the last time I drove to Houston from Austin, I opened my car door and my glasses fogged up and I was like, nope, I can't live here. It is too hot. I can't do this. And it's too humid. I can't do it.
Girl, I love Houston. Austin has changed so much since I graduated. It just doesn't even feel like the same city.
No, we literally, before we decided to come overseas, we were like, we don't want to stay in Texas, but where do we go? And every place that I thought of, I was just like, I don't want to live there. Yeah. Or I can't afford to live there. One of the two. But mostly it was, I don't really want to live there. We thought about like Vermont for a little while, but ain't nothing in Vermont. Like I might get to meet Bernie Sanders, but like that's about it. Like there's nothing in Vermont, so I'm not sure.
Right. I hear you. So do you have like a favorite quote or an affirmation that, sticks with you day to day?
Because of what I do, the one, and I had it up in my office. I haven't put it back up here, but I have this quote that says, email like it may one day be read aloud in deposition, which it doesn't sound, affirmative or whatever, but it is though, because of what I do. That's actually one of my favorite things to just remind myself of. I always have to be mindful. Whether I'm emailing, whether I'm speaking, specifically though, when you're writing it down, you have to be mindful of the way that you communicate. And so that's one of my favorites, just for that. It's just a constant reminder of be mindful of how you communicate.
Yeah.
And yes, haha, it might be read aloud in a deposition, but also it might just affect somebody
Exactly.
in a way that is negative, and that's not, shouldn't be the preference, at least not in most situations.
Right, because words definitely carry a lot of weight and have a lot of power, for sure.
Yes.
So then the last rapid fire question is, what do you love most about your culture?
About Black culture?
Mhm.
I just, honestly, I almost hate saying this, but I think it's beautiful that despite everything, it doesn't matter, being Black in this world, it doesn't matter if you're from the US, it doesn't matter where you're from, being Black in this world comes with certain realities.
Yeah.
But I just think it's beautiful how no matter where we are in this world, no matter what we're doing, we figure out a way to adapt and survive. And that sucks that we have to do that. But for at least the last, again, 400 or 500 years, our extermination has really been a goal.
Yeah.
Right? Or our extermination or our oppression. And despite that, everywhere in the world, Black people are still surviving and figuring out ways to thrive.
Yeah. Even
though this world was not built for us.
By us, not for us.
Listen. So again, that's, I love and I hate it because it shouldn't be that way.
Right.
But there's a beauty to the fact that we will not go silent into that dark night. Like, we just won't do it.
Not meant to.
And I don't, maybe I'm, puffing us up or whatever. I don't know if other folks could go through what we go through. I really don't.
I don't believe they could. And I don't have anything wrong with, us being puffed up, because if we don't do it for ourselves, guaranteed.
Well, and that too.
Nobody else will.
Listen, so yeah, we survive, and now we're learning to thrive globally. And I just think I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I am so grateful for you giving up your time. Wait, it's morning there, right?
Yeah, well, it's almost noon.
Okay, your morning, my evening, and sharing your wisdom with us. So just one thing, for the expat that's watching this, what is one inspiration that you would give them?
One inspiration that I would give them? If you're, I don't know, I mean, you're out here killing it. You made the decision to get up and get out and live your best life. And even if you're not in a place that you feel like is your forever home, you understand the power of it.
Yeah.
Right. So even if the place that you're in now is not 100% it, keep going, keep seeking. Maybe you're meant to be a nomad. Maybe you're meant to continually, relocate every so often. That's beautiful. Lean into that.
Yeah. I fully support that message, people. So, Ty, I want to thank you for coming and sharing and bearing your soul, giving us great wisdom tonight. And for everyone that is watching, thank you for tuning in again to Black and Abroad. I encourage you to keep taking risks, impacting your communities, and prioritizing your mental health. Please share this with the communities. And with that, we are going to say au revoir, adios. How do you say bye in Portuguese?
Ciao, just like ciao, ciao.
Ciao, ciao. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.